So working on the bumpers essentially involves us creating a new blueprint that's going to be something we can place in the world. Now, when the bumper is touched, first off, it's going to launch the ball away from it. The next thing that the bumper is going to do is it's going to flash up, it's going to change color, and it's going to have a little section on the bumper that kind of moves down and up every time it gets hit. As well as that, we're going to have some illumination kind of coming out of it, so just a dynamic light. So I'm going to go ahead and actually set one of those up now. So the first part of adding the bumper in is going to the Assets folder, and I'm going to import the static meshes into this location. Now there are two that we care about. There's the bump mechanism itself, as well as the pop bumper base. So once again, I'm going to load up the folder that I had and start importing these assets. I'm going to scroll down until I get to SM pop bumper base and pop bumper mechanism. I'm going to control click on both, and then I'm just going to drag these into the Assets folder. Once again, I'm actually going to not generate collision for these meshes, so I'm going to leave this unchecked. Again, because they're kind of round objects, we want them acting a certain way. I'm going to make sure it's set up correctly and just go through the motions myself. The next thing, everything else is set correctly, so I'm just going to hit import all. And now that they're in, you can see that we have these two meshes. So we've got this, which is going to be the main bumper. Things go under it and hit it. And then we've got this, which is going to be underneath it, popping up and down. So I'm going to go and right click, and I'm going to create a new blueprint class, but I'm going to do it in my blueprints folder. Nickel for every time I nearly messed that up. So go to there, blueprint class, and I'm going to create a new blueprint actor. And this is going to be called BP underscore bumper. I'm going to double click on the bumper, and you can now see that we've got a simple empty blueprint. So first thing that I'm going to do is going to add a static mesh. And I'm going to drag this over the top of the scene root so it becomes the scene root. I'm also going to click F2, which allows me to rename the object, and I'm going to call this bumper mesh. I'm going to set this now to be the bumper base. I'm now going to add another component, which again is a static mesh, and this is going to be called bumper mechanism. I'm going to set this to be the mechanism. And you can see that it's here. And essentially whenever this gets hit, it's going to go ding and pop down. So I'm going to leave that where it is for just the time being and get everything set up. Compile, save. So if I go off and I look at the bumper base, so I'm inside of the static mesh of the bumper. If you're trying to get there, you can do so by going to Assets and double clicking on the mesh itself. I'm going to go and add collision to the mesh. Now if I hit the collision button, you can see that we have complex collision that looks like this. But realistically, I'm going to be setting up a thin capsule on the inside that is one part of the collision, and around the top, which is another. But I'm also going to have an overlap region that is about here, that is going to be the thing that whenever the ball enters that region, it's going to get imparted with a force. So the great part of this is that if I go to here and I set enable collision to false on this bottom section, and we're only going to do this for just a minute, and I hit collision, auto convex collision, and I create it, it's actually only going to automatically generate collision for this top area. Now the collision that generated there isn't fantastic, but it will probably do for the top. I'm now going to re-enable collision on the bottom area, and instead of generating collision on that, I'm going to go collision, and I'm going to add myself simple capsule collision. And for the capsule collision, I'm just going to hit the spacebar to get to my scale widget. I'm just going to set this up to be just that inner section. And the reason I'm doing it this way again is because I kind of only actually want to have a hard collision around this outside, whereas overlap is going to be the rest of it. And the auto-generated collision can be a little bit nasty on these kind of objects. Whenever something's round, you really want to either make it correctly externally or do it by hand inside the engine. So that's our bumper base. I'm now going to go back to the bumper and into my event graph. So I'm in the blueprint of the bumper event graph, and I'm now just going to set this up. And the great part is setting something up like this is relatively easy. All I'm going to do is, when something overlaps the region that we want, we're going to go ahead and check if it's a ball. So to check if something is anything else, I'm going to get I'm going to right click here. I'm going to type in the word cast to ball. Now, essentially, a cast to a ball, cast to anything tries to verify that it is that kind of object that's being read into it. So it checks if the other actor is a ball, and if it is a ball, it fires this pin. If it's not a ball, it fires this pin. So I'm going to connect this up, and I'm going to say, if it's a ball, we want to run the function called bump. Now, I haven't created a bump function yet. I could just have a massive sprawl of code coming off to the side here, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to right-click here. I'm going to type in the word custom event, and I'm just going to add a custom event. And I'm going to call this bump. And you'll now see that if I go to here, I can drag off of this pin, off the execute pin at the very top, type in the word bump, and it now says, if it's a ball, do bump. Okay. Now the other thing that I'm gonna have to set up here is if whenever the bump function is called, I want it to actually read in a reference to the thing that we want to bump. So I'm going to add a new input pin by clicking there and adding a new input, and I'm going to type in the word ball, and I'm going to click reference and name it ball. So essentially what this means now is on begin overlap, so the second something is overlapping us, so it's in a region that counts as an overlap, check if it's a ball. Is it a ball? Can I connect these two pins? Is it a ball? Yes. Okay. And then do a bump on it. And a bump here is actually relatively easy. All we need to do is essentially get the direction between this and the ball, and then multiply it by whatever impulse level we really want to give it. So I'll give you an example of that. I want to add impulse, and I'm going to add, actually I'm going to drag off the ball and type add impulse. And essentially what we're doing here is on bump, get a reference to the ball mesh of the ball. And all I want to do is read in a direction that we want to send it in. Now, to get that direction, there's actually a really nice way to do it. Essentially, we need to look at our location and the ball's location and find out what direction that is. All I have to do that is type in get actor location, and that gets my location. Now, the next thing I need to do is, again, get actor location. This time I can just click on this and again hit Control W, which duplicates it. But instead of the target being self, I want the target to be the ball. So see how that's set up now? I then just drag off of this, and I type in get direction. You see there's this function called get unit direction vector. I'm going to connect the two up to each other. At which point I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say multiply this by a number. So I'm going to multiply this by 2,500. That'll do. And I'm going to plug that into the impulse. And that's now going to send an impulse of 2,500 in the direction from the bumper to the ball, into the ball. We're also going to check velocity change. Don't forget that one. It's very easy to make. So with this added, the next part that we need to add is I'm going to go to my viewport again, and I'm going to add a component. And all this component is going to be is very simple. I'm going to add capsule collision, and I'm going to set the capsule collision to be a radius of, oops, sorry, I gotta set the height up as well. Doesn't matter if it goes into the ground. I'm just going to set this up quickly as, say, 200 by, you know what, 100 is probably good, but I'm going to call it 120 so it just bumps almost immediately. I'm going to set the half height as well to be 180. There you go. So with this, I'm also going to double check that it's set up correctly. I can see that it's set to overlap all dynamic. So at the moment this is set to overlap anything that goes into it. In this case, I actually only really care if the thing that it's overlapping is a physics body. So I'm going to click this button and tell it to ignore everything that isn't a physics body, and I'm going to tell it to overlap just the physics body. Okay? If I now hit compile, all I need to do from this point in is go to my blueprints, and I'm going to drop in the bumper and just add it here. You can hit play, and you can see that it got pinged off of it. So I'm going to add a couple of these by alt dragging just into the scene. so you can kind of get a better idea of what's going on. World's easiest game of pinball right now. Ding, ding. That was a good trick. You can see that each one though is kind of just propelling it outwards. Ding, 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 ding. Cool. So we've got ourselves a basic setup. Just gonna put my camera somewhere a bit nicer. There we go. And we've now got ourselves the initial part of a functioning bumper. But for us to keep going on this, we really want to set up the rest of it. So we want to give it the following things. We want to have a sound that plays. We want to have the movement, and we want to have the light. And as well as that, we want to actually set up the bumper to have something nice on it. So let's begin with setting it up as an actual actor. So setting up a material and such. I'm going to go to my assets, and I'm going to go to that folder. And once again, I'm going to this time go to textures, and I'm going to drag in the texture for the bumper. So the texture for the bumper is just here under T, pop bumper top. I'm going to drag that in. And I'm going to right click here and I'm going to create a new material called M_bumper. So I'm going to open this up. And now we're going to just set this up very quickly. So because we want to add a texture, I could type in the word texture and look for it, but again, I'm going to take the shortcut of holding down T and left clicking, which adds a texture sample. I'm then going to click here and tell it that the texture that we want is T bumper top. Now, this looks wrong, right? Like this doesn't seem correct. It's just a bright red texture. However, remember before I said that we have red, green, blue, and alpha? So alpha, if we look at it in this case, actually stores that. So this alpha channel is what we're going to use to set up our bumpers. And it's going to be controlled by a couple of parameters so that every bumper can be distinctive if we want it to be. And this is going to be reasonably straightforward. I'm going to essentially use this to control a blend between two different colors for the base. And as well as that, I'm going to use this as something to drive the emissive parameter that controls whether it's like lighting up or not. So I'm going to click L to add what's called a linear interpolation. Again, I can do that by going up here and type in linear interp. Now, a linear interp is very straightforward. You've got three parameters, A, B, and alpha. Now, in this situation, I'm going to run the alpha into the alpha, and all this does is wherever this texture is black, it will make whatever color we want it to be. And wherever it's white, B will be whatever color we say. So I'm going to plug this into here, and you'll notice that nothing changes. And that's because by default, a lerp blends between 0 and 1, or black and white. So I'm going to hold down V to add a vector parameter, which is going to be my first color. I'm going to hold down V and add another one. And then I'm just going to quickly name these base color. And this can be logo color. And I'm going to set my logo color by default to be, let's go with a blue. That'll do. I'm going to plug that into B. You can see that we've got that. And I'm going to set the base color by default to be white. That'll do. Going with a slightly grayer color, but that's fine. I'm going to hit apply. Now, the other thing that I said that I wanted was something to control the like how bright the emissive was on it. And that's going to be rather simple. For the time being, I'm going to just use the logo colors color as the emissive color. So I'm going to drag off of this, and I'm going to multiply it. You can also hold down M as a shortcut. I'm going to multiply it by a parameter that says whether it should currently be lit or not. So I'm going to hold down S to add a scalar parameter, which means a parameter that's driven by just one single number. I'm going to call this emissive boost. And the other thing that I'm going to do, so if I right click on this and hit start preview, you can see that by default it's blue multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. It's equal to black. If I change the emissive boost to 1, we get this. But that's not actually what I want. If you think about it, I then need to multiply what we have here against the alpha texture. And if I right click on this and preview, we now get this instead. So only this blue bit will be emissive. And if I tell it to be very bright, it'll pop up like this. So we've got our emissive boost that's going to come out like that. And if I plug this into emissive color and I stop previewing, you'll see that it now looks like that when it's lit up, if that's a value of 20. And if it's not lit up, it'll just look like that. One thing that's probably going to look kind of nice here, but be reasonably subtle, is typically when something like that is lighting up beneath the surface, it's going to have a rather smooth level of roughness. So the last thing that I'm going to do here is simply, I'm going to hold down L to add another linear interpolate, or lerp. I'm going to plug the alpha in, I'm going to plug that into the roughness. And all I'm going to say is I'm going to click on this because I don't think this really needs to be parameterized. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to say whenever you are, I'm going to preview it so I can see it clearer. Whenever you are the logo, I want you to have a bright roughness of 0.25. And whenever you're just the rest of it, 1's probably fine. You can now see that we get this nice shine going across the blue, which I think will look a little bit better later on. So that's it that we really need for our material. Make sure that by default your emissive boost is set to 0 so that you don't run into issues. I'm going to hit apply, I'm going to save it, I'm then going to go to here, and I'm just going to apply the material to the top. So I'm going to set this up as the bumper. By default, this actually just grabs the outsides on that part, so it's fine. I'm then going to do it again, bumper. You now see that we've got that set up nicely. If I hit save and I look in the world, you can see that these are all in there. However, we do have the issue that because of where the camera is located in my situation, these are all actually upside down. So I'm just going to control click on all of them. And I'm going to set the default yaw value to be 180, which flips them around 180 degrees. So that's our base setup for a bumper. Let's go through and add the last little bits to it from here in the next lesson. So coming up next, we're going to be looking at the component changes as well as adding lights to it.